Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to our Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana Das, and it's an honor to have you here with me. A pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Those of you who are joining me live this evening, it's great to see you here. And those of you who are watching after the fact, thank you very much for being here. And as is our general practice, I will ask those who are currently here with me to raise their hands if you can hear me. Annie, thank you very much. Jill. All right, everybody can hear me. Yay. Hi, Bonnie. All right, let us then get on with the show and take care of our other housekeeping business. For those of you who are new to the live satsang, you can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options up in the upper right-hand corner. No need to worry about your microphone or video camera. You can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. But if you would like to be heard, then please type something into the chat, questions, comments, etc. You can also use the Q&A box if you so desire. Last time. Here in chapter 18, we spoke about the 5 factors of action, egoism and tunnel vision, and Arjuna's license to kill, which is where we left off. We covered verses 13 and 17, and we really just got started with verse 17 towards the end of our class. So we will pick up where we left off with Arjuna's license to kill. And we'll look at some commentaries that will, I hope, illuminate the meaning of this verse. Then we will move on to knowledge, the knowable, and the knower. The rule of threes continues. Knowledge according to the qualities of material nature, and action according to the qualities of material nature. We're going to cover verses 18 through 25. And before we go any further, as usual, we will chant our invocation mantra. For those of you who are new to transliterated Sanskrit, the dot over the M indicates that we close our lips and the back of our tongue to the roof of our mouth at the same time. A bar across the top of a vowel indicates a long and open version of that vowel, in this case an A, as opposed to a short and staccato version of that vowel. So with that, I will chant, and if you like, you can chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, who is the all-pervading transcendence, the son of Vasudeva being Krishna, the speaker of the Bhagavad-gita. We were just about to chant this verse last week, and so therefore we will begin with chanting this verse this week. So once again, the diacritical marks, we already know about bars across vowels. A dot over an N works pretty much the same way as a dot over an M, except you're not going to bother to bring your lips together because it's not a sound, but rather a sound. So the back of your tongue to the back of the roof of your mouth, as opposed to a regular N sound from behind your teeth. A dot under an R means you're going to curl your tongue up into the center of the roof of your mouth, as opposed to bringing your top teeth past your lower lip. You pronounce each letter. So, and H after a consonant means that you're just going to put some air after that consonant. You will also see two Ds together where you're going to hit the first D, slam on the brakes, and proceed with the next D. And that'll do it. There are very few diacritical marks giving us hints as to the pronunciation. So with that, I will chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Here we go. Yasya nahankrito bhavo buddhiryasya nalipyate hatvapi sa imalokan nahanti na nibhadyate. So you may have noticed I brought out a different melody or cadence for this particular verse. The translation: one whose state of being is not influenced by the belief that they alone are the cause of action, whose discernment is untainted, does not kill even when killing those who are here, and is never bound by their actions. So this is a pretty intense statement and a little bit paradoxical. One does not kill even when one does kill. So this is one of these verses where the meaning might not be so self-evident, but the implication is clear that there's a way, somehow or other, that Krishna is justifying the duty that Arjuna must perform, which is to engage in the battle and kill his enemies, which include his cousins, his teacher, his grandfather. And he's assuring him that even if you kill them, you won't really be killing them. Well, first of all, what does that mean? And is this not just some rationalization for God told me to do it kind of murder? Well, before we unpack all of this, an interesting thing to do here is to look at what happens when we invert this verse. So I'm leaving it up on the screen for a moment so that we can do that. I'm going to read this as if it said exactly the opposite. One whose state of being is influenced by the belief that they alone are the cause of action, whose discernment is tainted, kills, even when not killing those who are here, and is bound by their actions. So let's go on the assumption for a moment that we are influenced by the belief that we are the cause of action, that we are the ones who are making things happen. And therefore our discernment is tainted by egoism, the belief that I am the doer, ahamkara, aham, I, kara, doing. So this is the false ego. Let's say we're under the influence of the false ego and we think I'm the one who's making it happen. Then even when we don't kill, we are still killing. And we are obligated to experience the reactions to our actions. Well, that doesn't take any of the mystery out of it. How are we killing when we're not killing? Let us consider the distinction that Krishna makes at the very beginning of the Bhagavad-gita. That is to say, the distinction between spirit and matter. He tells Arjuna that you're worried about killing people here on the battlefield, but someone in knowledge understands that it is not possible to kill or cause anyone to die. And your reluctance, therefore, is based on the misidentification of the self with the body. All right. So let's say we are misidentifying the self as the body. Then, even if we don't kill the body, but we think I am the doer, then what's being killed is spiritual consciousness. Because all of our actions deepen the taint of consciousness, deepen the illusion that I am this body and that I am the doer of activities. And therefore, in that sense, one causes the death of higher consciousness, of spiritual consciousness, of the realization of the true nature of the self. So living, having a material body, but living in such a way as to reinforce one's own illusion and the illusion of others is, in this sense, a way of causing their deaths, because without the elevation to spiritual consciousness and freedom from reaction to actions, one is obliged to repeat over and over again this cycle of death and rebirth and death and rebirth. You essentially ensure that you and everyone you know will die over and over and over and over again, because that's the nature of karma and samsara for an Atma who is embodied and under the influence of the false ego. By contrast, one whose state of being is not influenced by this idea that I am the doer, I'm the one who's making it happen, and whose discernment is not polluted by the misconception of the body as the self. That person can act freely. And if it is their duty, not just because they feel like it or because they're under the illusion that the voices in their head are God, or that the cause of their own specific sectarian religion is so great and God only endorses their particular form of faith and somehow or other proclaims that all the non-believers should die. But rather, if it is simply your duty based on universal principles of religion or morality to defend righteousness, or to defend the helpless or the vulnerable, or to protect others, then you can, in fact, kill the body of an aggressor, knowing full well that you have not killed the person within the body. And at the same time, because your act is righteous, done simply out of duty, without attachment to either the action or the results of the action, knowing that you are operating under the guidance of a higher authority other than your own mind and senses, then you are not held accountable karmically for your actions. A couple of examples are given. When a soldier kills under the command of a superior officer in battle, they're not subject to judgment in a court of law. They were doing their duty. If, on the other hand, a soldier kills their own personal account without or independently of the command of a superior officer, then they can and should certainly be judged by a court of law. So here Arjuna is being encouraged to act under the direction of the supreme person, the highest authority. And the argument here is for warfare based on universal principles of religion, not on the basis of privileging a particular faith form over others. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important, as far as I'm concerned, to understand that the Bhagavad-gita is not a Hindu text. I was looking at an online course on the Bhagavad-gita. I was just following a thread in social media that led me to a course on the Bhagavad-gita. That the course description begins with the Bhagavad-gita is the most important Hindu text. And I thought, this course has immediately lost its legitimacy in my eyes, because it's proposing that a book about that's filled with transcendental knowledge of universal principles of religion, that has no basis in any sectarian faith form, is a product of Hinduism, a particular form of faith. And as I've spoken about in previous classes, Hinduism, just like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or any other religion that you can name, is an upadi. In Sanskrit, upadi, it means a covering, a temporary mask, a temporary designation that has to do with your material circumstances. I can be born a Christian and convert to Islam, or I can be born a Hindu and convert to Christianity. I can be born Jewish and renounce my Judaism, take up the practice of Zen Buddhism. These are all temporary material designations. So if we think that the Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu text and that Krishna is a Hindu god, and he's telling Arjuna that within the Hindu system of thought, his duty to kill in this battlefield is justified, then we're getting a justification from the point of view of a sectarian religion rather than universal principles of religion. So I just wanted to reiterate that point and use this as an example of why this understanding of the Bhagavad Gita is so important, at least in my view. Aside from that, Krishna is making a clear distinction based on universal principles of religion, which is there is good and there is bad. Discernment means being able to tell the difference between objective good and objective bad. So it's not all good. Some of it's bad. In fact, a lot of it is bad. Most of it's bad. The material world, it's just bad. At least, anyway, most of it's bad. But it's all good. Here's what Ramanuja has to say about this verse. I'm going to borrow something from Ramanuja's commentary, then I'm going to ask for your comments and questions or reflections on this before we move on. So again, Ramanuja confirms that the word ahankara means ego and refers to one who thinks themselves the doer of actions, I the doer. And it is an erroneous figment of the mind that attaches itself to this illusory conviction. This false notion arises out of identification with the false ego and infatuation with the bodily conception of life. And these kinds of notions and conceptions are completely absent in those who have spiritual intelligence, and out of that spiritual intelligence have, like Arjuna at this point in the Gita, surrendered themselves fully to the will of the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Jumping to Madhava's commentary, Madhava says that one who is conscious that they are fully dependent on the Supreme Person will not be affected by any defects in their actions, for they will not possess the attitude that they are the doer. This is a great line from this commentary. This, not being affected by the defects of their actions, this is the special dispensation that such consciousness bequeaths. So this is a kind of divine intervention, a merciful kind of divine intervention for those who understand that they are in a dependent position rather than an independent position. And then finally, another comment from Ramanuja to wrap it up. This highly evolved consciousness of being fully dependent on the Supreme Person, never considering oneself the doer of any action, arises out of sattva guna, the mode of goodness. And therefore it is a virtuous trait worthy of acquisition to be cultured and implemented. So that wraps up verse 17, finishing up from last time. And if you have any comments, questions, or reflections, realizations about this very important verse in this section of the 18th chapter, I would be, of course, very interested to hear your thoughts. So please pop them up into the chat, any questions, comments that you have. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, we begin with the 18th verse, officially, for this episode of our Gita Satsang. And we will have, I'll go through the translations of each of the verses, and then I will come back and we'll look at each verse in some detail. So beginning with verse 18 of the 18th chapter, Krishna continues. Knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the three factors that motivate action. The senses, the work, and the doer are the three constituents of action. According to the three different modes of material nature, there are three kinds of knowledge, action, and performer of action. Now hear of them from me. Text 20. That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. Text 21. That knowledge by which one sees that in every different body there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. Text 22. And that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness. Text 23. That action which is regulated and which is performed without attachment, without love or hatred, and without desire for fruitive results, is said to be in the mode of goodness. Verse 24. But action performed with great effort by one seeking to gratify their senses, or by one seeking to gratify their desires, and enacted from a sense of false ego, is called action in the mode of passion. Verse 25, that action performed in illusion, in disregard for scriptural injunctions, and without concern for future bondage or for violence or distress caused to others, is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So that will be our last verse for this evening. Now let's go back up and take a look at each verse in detail. All right, so verse 18, once again, knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the three factors that motivate action. The senses, the work, and the doer are the three constituents of action. So the rule of threes is all over the place here. The Gita is dualistic. Duality means there's a relationship between one thing and another thing. First of all, there are two things, thing one and thing two. I would illustrate this, but Dr. Seuss's estate would probably sue me. So you've got thing one, thing two, and maybe things 3, 4, and 5. Duality means relationship between things, and that those things have some basis in reality. And here, Krishna speaks about knowledge as if it were a real thing, the object of knowledge as if that were a real thing, and the knower. And certainly the knower is a real thing. The most real thing is the person who is knowing, including knowing that the sense of perception is there, that the mind and senses are the vehicle of perception, but not the person perceiving, etc. So even though Krishna is speaking, presumably in the material world, he is giving some validation for these as real things. And in order for that validation to be there, they have to have their basis in something that is eternal. Because earlier in the Gita, Krishna defined that which is real based on whether or not it is eternal. That which exists, that has a basis in reality, is understood to endure, and that which actually is in the category of illusion comes and goes. So therefore, there must be, if knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower have some standing worthy of Krishna's discussion of them, then that which we know, that the objects of knowledge, they must have some counterpart in an eternal spiritual reality, which is to say, we can have knowledge of the material world and material things. We can also have spiritual knowledge. The object of knowledge can be a material object or a spiritual object. Most of the time, we don't hear in yoga philosophy that there's a distinction, a qualification. Is it a material object or a spiritual object? Is it material consciousness or spiritual consciousness? So in this way, the Gita is speaking on the basis of duality. Here, previously, we heard about the causes of action and action itself. So there are two things when you think that ultimately the Supreme Person is the cause of everything. So that's a duality right there, cause and effect. There are often three things, thing one, thing two, and the thing that connects them. So knowledge is the thing that connects the object of knowledge with the knower of the object. Work is the thing that connects the instrument of work with the worker. The fourth thing consists of three things, namely the impetus to work itself, thinking, feeling, and willing, provide the impetus for the worker to engage in work with an instrument of work. So this is almost kind of circling back around to the philosophy of enumeration, or Sankhya, where we are making distinctions between various elements of our experience. which brings us to the next verse. So once again, if you have any questions or comments about the 18th verse, please share them with me, and I will keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A. Meanwhile, text 19, according to the three different modes of material nature, there are three kinds of knowledge: action and performer of action. So three kinds of knowledge, three kinds of action, three kinds of performers of action. Now hear of them from me. So what's going to happen here, what Krishna is introducing, is the idea that knowledge comes in three flavors: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, or goodness, passion, and ignorance, the three qualities of material nature. Action as well falls under these three categories, and the performer of action as well. So back in the 14th chapter, these three divisions of the qualities, modes, strands of material nature were described in some detail. The quality of goodness, or sattva, is understood to be pure and illuminating, characterized by knowledge, by clarity of thought, detachment, and it results in the acquisition of understanding, the elevation of consciousness, and happiness. The quality of goodness is not the same thing as being intelligent, because spiritual intelligence is not measured by IQ. And the mode of goodness is the highest platform of material consciousness that acts as a launching pad into pure spiritual consciousness. So you can be a relatively simple person and be in the mode of goodness, and therefore in a very spiritually elevated position, or relatively speaking, materially elevated. You can be very intelligent and under the influence of the mode of ignorance, and therefore, from that standpoint, be in a very low position. The Bhagavad-gita's standard of measurement is based on the mode of goodness, whereas modern life, our standard of measurement is in the mode of passion, or rajas, which is born of hankering. It's characterized by a distortion of intelligence caused by intense endeavor and attachment to the results of our intense endeavor. And the outcome of that, the natural result of being in the mode of passion, is greed, anxiety, misery, and stalled spiritual progress. Now, that's not the same thing as being enthusiastic. Enthusiasm requires the mode of passion, but the mode of passion is more than that, insofar as it involves this intense endeavor and attachment to the results. And we think that's laudable. We glorify people who work really hard to achieve their dreams and get what they want. And you can do it. We can all do it. The Bhagavad-gita doesn't really think very much of this kind of hankering for achievement and the acquisition of material success. It's just not that important. In fact, it's considered something that can easily get in the way of your spiritual progress, because it'll bend your intelligence out of shape. And it just results in anxiety, because you're worried about getting the thing you want or keeping the thing you've got in a world that is designed to make it difficult to get what you want and take it all away from you in due course of time. Therefore, anxiety in the mode of passion is inevitable. Beneath this, ignorance, tamas, born of delusional thinking, is characterized by insanity, apathy, sleep, and belligerence, vitriol. It results in illusion, foolishness, violence towards others, and the degradation of consciousness. So, like I said before, it's not the same as stupid. You can be a very, very intelligent person, but if you're influenced by the mode of ignorance, then you will be very intelligent in the execution of your nastiness, in deeds that will cause harm, and you won't care. You just won't care how much suffering you cause. It's indifference to the suffering of others, which is exactly the opposite of the mood of someone in the mode of goodness. Someone in the mode who's elevating their consciousness toward the mode of goodness, the one thing that they will not be able to tolerate is the suffering of others. So it's exactly the opposite mood. So far, we have heard Krishna speak about specific things as they are understood through this lens of the qualities of material nature, which, for my money, is the most underrated aspect of yoga philosophy. The qualities of material nature, this concept, this idea that these three primary colors that create every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing that we see is vastly underutilized by the yoga community as a way of seeing the world, simply because it's not understood. So far, Krishna has spoken about how to understand austerity, gift-giving, sacrifice, faith or worship, food, and activities, prescribed duties in relationship to these three qualities of material nature, how one acts in these various categories can be understood when looked at through this lens of the three qualities of material nature. This verse, in this verse, Krishna says now he's going to explain knowledge, actors, workers, and work itself according to these three qualities of material nature. And he begins in this next verse, which is verse number 20. That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. Now, this is a really interesting verse, especially when you consider that I just said that the Bhagavad-gita is dualistic. And here, Krishna says, one undivided spiritual nature, clearly a non-dualistic understanding of all living entities, even though they are divided into innumerable forms. And if you see that one undivided spiritual nature, even though you're seeing lots of different forms, that's understood to be in the mode of goodness or spiritually elevated. And this verse sounds like a contradiction to the very first instruction, where Krishna validates our experience of individuality on a spiritual level. So we could easily get confused by this verse. The verse I'm referring to, by the way, is verse 12 of the second chapter. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us ever cease to be. So the Gita is also non-dualistic insofar as there is one shared spiritual quality, one spiritual energy, spiritual force, spiritual attribute. That is to say, the quality of being spiritual is shared by all living beings. So in this sense, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. And you are also Brahman, and we are all Brahman. We're all made of the same spiritual substance. There's one living force which is the superior nature of Krishna. When Krishna describes earlier, he tells Arjuna, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know. Beyond this, there's nothing left. And then he goes through the 5 material elements and the 3 metaphysical elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. These constitute my separated material energies. In the next verse, but beyond these separated material energies, there's a superior energy, which is the energy of the living entity. And then beyond all that, there's me. I am the cause and substance of all of this. So there's simultaneously a duality and a non-duality. There's a qualitative non-duality in terms of a oneness of spiritual nature. And that spiritual nature is undivided insofar as the spiritual energy, the living force, cannot be cut by a sword, split in any way, the way you can split up matter. It's indivisible. So in that sense, there is unity on the spiritual platform. And that unity appears in a multiplicity of life forms here in the material world. Jill, I got your question. I'll come back to it in a second. So here's where things start to sound like a Zen koan. Everything is Krishna, and there's nothing but Krishna. Yet, nothing is Krishna save and except for Krishna himself. This idea of being dependent, this consciousness that is glorified by Madhva and Ramanuja in their commentaries of feeling dependent, and the idea that of independence being illusion means that we are inextricably part of Krishna. And Krishna is the complete whole of which we are a part. And the idea that we are apart, that we are independent, that we have some existence outside of Krishna is the illusion. In his commentary, and Annie, I got your question too. In his commentary on this verse in the Bhagavad-gita, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada writes, a person who sees one spirit soul in every living being, whether a demigod, a human being, animal, bird, beast, aquatic, or plant, possesses knowledge in the mode of goodness. In all living entities, one spirit soul is there, although they have different bodies in terms of their previous work. In other words, there's no qualitative difference in the spirit soul, Brahman, but there's a difference in the material body that they have acquired due to their karma. Prabhupada continues, as described in the 7th chapter, the manifestation of the living force in every body is due to the superior nature of the Supreme Lord. Thus, to see that one superior nature, that living force in every body, is to see in the mode of goodness. That living energy is imperishable, although the bodies are perishable. Differences are perceived in terms of the body. Because there are many forms of material existence in conditional life, the living force appears to be divided. Such impersonal knowledge is an aspect of self-realization. So there's an impersonal understanding of Brahman as being the ground of being. This is one of the definitions of Brahman, the substratum of existence. So that, Annie, is the answer to your question, which is this what is sometimes called the ground of being? And the answer is yes. Brahman is the spiritual foundation upon which everything spiritual and material rests. So here we get some validation to this impersonal understanding of the oneness of Brahman as an aspect of self-realization. But it's not necessarily a complete understanding, because beyond the impersonal aspect of Brahman is the personal aspect of Paramatma, the Lord within the heart, who Krishna has certainly validated as a feature of reality rather than as a materially contrived Ishtadevata that one worships for the sake of realizing that they are the Paramatma, or the self with a capital S. And of course, Bhagavan, the personal form of the Supreme Person, Krishna himself. In previous chapters, he has confirmed that one who understands the transcendental nature of his appearance and his activities does not have an obligation to return to this material world, but comes to his world and acquires Krishna's nature, which is to say pure spiritual consciousness, which is not the same thing as saying that you become Krishna himself, the complete whole, or the complete absolute truth with all the omniscience, omnipresence, etc. that goes with that. And with that, let me turn to Jill's question, which is in the Q&A box. Okay, but why? Why does Krishna create everything? Well, there are two creations. One is this material world, and Krishna creates this material world to facilitate our desire to have the illusion of independence. We can come here and think, I am the doer. I am the one who's making everything happen. I'm going to move the world in alignment with my desires. It's all going to revolve around me. And I have an independent existence from the Supreme Being. So the material creation is created to facilitate our desire for the illusion of an independent existence. And Krishna obliges us by disappearing from our view, even though he is omnipresent. The spiritual creation, or the spiritual manifestation, exists for the sake of Krishna's enjoyment and the enjoyment of all those in pure consciousness of their dependent position as integral parts of a complete whole. Because once again, the dualistic aspect of this involves relationship. What's the relationship between the complete whole and the part, or Krishna and the living entity? Well, the essence of the relationship is one of love and an exchange of love. And love is the ultimate bliss. And Vedanta tells us that because Brahman is naturally joyful and is the wellspring of joy, we as parts of reality, parts of the ground of being, having the same nature of Brahman, we are also naturally joyful. The particular phrase is anandamaya bhyasat. So on the one hand, the material creation exists to facilitate our desire for the illusion of independence, and the spiritual realm exists for the sake of enjoying the bliss of spiritual relationships. And in between that, the impersonal aspect is there for those who wish to kind of disappear from the whole thing on either end and merge into the undifferentiated oneness of being, which is also an aspect of spiritual consciousness. So I hope, Jill, that answers your question. And Annie, I hope I've covered yours. And let's see if we have time to carry on with the last few verses that we have this evening. And of course, if you have any other questions, they get priority. You're welcome. So text number 21, that knowledge by which one sees that in every different body there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. So this is where we find most people, and maybe even most of us. The concept that the material body is the living entity, and that with the destruction of the body, the consciousness is also destroyed. So this is called knowledge in the mode of passion. The idea that we didn't exist, then we came into being when this body was born, and then when this body dies, we go out of being. This is a conception of life in the mode of passion. So according to this kind of knowledge, this mode of passion knowledge, or knowledge in the mode of passion, the body is itself the cause of consciousness, and there is no separate soul or atma beyond the body. And as a result, consciousness is understood to be temporary. We are understood to be temporary beings. Beyond this body, there's nothing. The experience of individual souls is understood as a product of illusion, that in reality there's either nothing, no soul, or there's one all-pervading soul, which is full of knowledge, and the whole idea of an individual person in a material body is just a manifestation of some temporary ignorance. So in other words, a person in the mode of passion thinks that a person in a dog body is a dog, and a person in a fish body is a fish, and a person in a human being body is a human being, and they're categorically different, qualitatively different, because the identification is made on the basis of the body, as opposed to the mode of goodness that says, here's a material body, and there are all kinds of different bodies that you could be in, and they're all spiritual beings, jivas, atmas, little sparks of spiritual consciousness. And one spiritual spark of consciousness is in a dog body and thinks he's a dog, and one is in a fish body and thinks he or she is a fish, etc., etc., etc. So that's the distinction between the mode of passion and the mode of goodness, insofar as the identification of the self with the body is concerned. Which brings us to text 22, and that knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all, without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness, or the mode of ignorance. So this is what I mean when I spoke earlier in the first verse that we spoke about this evening, Arjuna's license to kill. If one is attached to one set of beliefs, one kind of work can be work according to a particular political persuasion, or work according to a particular religious idea. And one is attached to this one narrow vision as the all in all. That is understood to be in the mode of ignorance. In other words, very, very narrow tunnel kind of vision about what is true, what is right, what is good. So for the common person, this is a lot of what we see. We see that God is money. Even though we may go to church on Sundays, what we're really worshiping is money. And knowledge is understood to consist entirely of knowing how to satisfy the demands of the body, as opposed to the demands of the heart, the demands of the intellect, or the demands of the spirit. So this kind of knowledge doesn't have any connection to the absolute truth at all. It's more or less like the knowledge of an animal, only concerned with how am I going to acquire food? How am I going to protect myself? How am I going to satisfy the desires that arise in my body associated with reproduction, etc. So this kind of knowledge is not considered particularly valuable or good or helpful, even knowledge in this mode of being. So in the last three verses, Krishna has covered knowledge concerning the spirit soul beyond the body, which is called knowledge in the mode of goodness, knowledge that produces many different theories and doctrines by dint of mundane logic and mental speculation, so that's in the mode of passion, and then knowledge that's only concerned with keeping the body comfortable is said to be knowledge in the mode of ignorance. And that winds up knowledge in the three qualities of material nature. And here in these last verses, Krishna will speak about action, beginning with verse 23. That action which is regulated and which is performed without attachment, without love or hatred, without desire for fruitive results, is said to be in the mode of goodness. So here we find action that takes place beyond some of the obstacles to yoga. The ones specifically mentioned here are attraction and aversion, or love and hatred is another way of saying attraction and aversion. So these are two of the 5 obstacles to yoga. The 5 obstacles are ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life or fear of death, identification with the body. So when vanity and ego get out of the way and we're not interested in the rewards for our actions, but it's selfless action, that action is understood to be in the mode of goodness. And this is a reiteration of something Krishna said back in the 3rd chapter, in the 30th verse, where he says, "Therefore, O Arjuna, cast aside your fever of inertia," the mode of ignorance, "offer your actions to me in complete knowledge of the Supreme Self within," mode of goodness, "and fight without yearning for ownership or profit." Again, characteristic of the mode of goodness. So Krishna is characterizing Arjuna's state of being at the beginning of the Bhagavad-gita as being influenced by ego, and as a result, coming under the influence of the material modes of passion and ignorance. And he is trying to elevate him to the level of the mode of goodness, clearly. In the next verse, by contrast, "But action performed with great effort by one seeking to gratify their desires and enacted from a sense of false ego is called action in the mode of passion." So as we have discussed, and as Krishna discussed in the 14th chapter, the 7th verse, he said, "The mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings. And because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruitive actions." Or in other words, you are obliged to experience a reaction to all the actions you perform when you are pursuing the fruits of those actions or desiring to taste the fruits of your actions. And then finally, verse 25, "That action performed in illusion, in disregard for scriptural injunctions, and without concern for future bondage or for violence or distress caused to others, is said to be in the mode of ignorance." So you look at an action being performed by someone who's just making stuff up based on their own conception of the way it ought to be, who's absolutely convinced that their way is the only way, and who are callous in their indifference to the violence or suffering that their actions cause, thinking that their cause is so righteous that the suffering of others is justified for its furtherance, is understood to be in the mode of ignorance. Whereas someone who's influenced by the mode of goodness would be acting in such a way to benefit everyone, and their actions do not cause people to suffer, but rather they're beneficial to everyone, based on compassion and higher principles that come from higher authorities other than one's own conjecture or speculation. And that takes us to the end of the verses for this evening. So tonight's class, we wrapped up Arjuna's license to kill and explained how you can kill without killing, or how you can kill even when you're not. We spoke about knowledge, the knowable and the knower, knowledge according to the material qualities, and action according to the material qualities. We covered verses 18 through 15. So here's last call for questions or comments or reflections. You know, I always ask for questions, and I'd be just as interested to hear a reflection. That is to say, to know what in this section, in these passages, really stood out to you, made an impression of one kind or another, made you stop and go, So please feel free to share those with me now, if you are here with me now, or if you are watching this after the fact, please share your questions, comments, or reflections with me. You can email me, hari@hari-kirtana.com, and I'll always be very, very happy to hear from you. And Evelyn, I'm glad to see that you got a steady internet connection after a couple of tries. Next week, we will continue with the Yoga of Perfect Renunciation. We will speak about the psychology of action, the psychology of knowledge, and understanding morons with high IQs. I'm betting if you're like me, you have experienced very, very intelligent people who are idiots. And you just wonder how that can be. Well, Krishna's got an explanation for that. All right. Annie, before we go, I am dwelling on dualism, including good and bad, right and wrong. And are we supposed to transcend this? Yes, because there is good and there is bad. And then there's spiritual good, and that's categorically different. So the word for spiritual goodness is Shuddha Sattva, as opposed to just garden variety sattva. There's the mode of goodness, which is good, and there's the mode of darkness, which is bad, and there's the mode of passion, which is not great either. And when you put the two together, passion and ignorance, but beyond all of them is Shuddha Sattva, or transcendental goodness. And when one is situated in transcendental goodness, one transcends the modes of material nature, and yet at the same time, especially if you're still here in the material world with a body composed of material elements, then you act according to your nature, but you dovetail all the stuff that makes up your material nature into spiritual action, because you've spiritualized your consciousness, and therefore you can spiritualize your material body and your action. The material body is the instrument of action. The knower is the spiritual consciousness. The knowledge is spiritual knowledge. Therefore, one who has arrived at or is approaching, at least on the trajectory, on the way to transcendental consciousness, engages everything in transcendence, for the purpose of transcendence. And therefore, even in this material world, one's actions become eventually totally spiritualized, and everything we do has the same spiritual nature as Brahman. There are some earlier verses where Krishna describes, when he's describing sacrifice, and I believe it'll be in the 4th chapter, how when one is transcendentally situated, everything involved in an act that is performed as an offering to the Supreme Person becomes spiritualized and has the same nature, same spiritual nature, namely Brahman. So I hope that answers your question with regard to dualism. You're welcome so much. All right. And dip. That's all, folks. Thank you very, very much for sharing your time with me. It's always a pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. And I look forward to seeing you next time. And I hope you have a wonderful evening or day or afternoon, as the case may be. Take care.